So my name's Coby. I'm here with Andrés, and we are with Across Realities. Going to talk about spatiating through a shared reality and some lessons we've learned developing for multi-platform XR. So again, my name's Coby. I'm senior content producer at Across Realities. So I, have been able to witness and try to bring to light a lot of the incredible things that that Across Realities has been doing with cross-platform XR. Today, we're going to talk about what is Spatiate, who we are, how we got here, kind of why we think it's a really important thing to build cross-platform XR, some lessons that we've learned in doing so, hopefully going to debunk some spatial computing myths, give you guys a live demo, and have some time for Q&A afterwards. So what is Spatiate? So the dictionary definition, rove, ramble, stroll, and we found this lovely etymological origin from a dictionary from 1755, where we have this lovely example which says, confined to a narrow chamber, he could spatiate at large through the whole universe, which we think really demonstrates exactly what is possible with with XR and multi-user XR, which we think is pretty cool. And Spatiate is also the application that Across Realities has developed in order to demonstrate, why cross-platform XR is so great and so useful and enjoyable. It's a real-time multi-platform XR application. It's a proof of this hypothesis we have that cross-platform is going to be a really important thing, and it's an app that works for Magic Leap iOS and Android. And so now I'm going to hand it off to the one and only Andrés.
Thanks, Coby. So thanks everyone for joining us. We're really excited to share what we've been working on for the past couple of years and make sure that you all can learn from what we've learned going through this path. My name is Andrés, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Across Realities and a senior software engineer at Twitter by day, so juggling those two things. We set out to build Spatiate and this whole project with a couple of very specific goals. First off, we wanted to make sure that we could make use of high-end head-mounted displays to push the boundaries of spatial computing and make sure that we can really innovate and experiment at the tip of the platform innovation. But at the same time, have compatibility with mobile phones. We didn't want this to be like a high-end only experience that very few people will have access to. We also wanted to make sure that we build something that provides value, not just a prototype, not just a proof of concept, but actually a real application that you're going to want to use for fun, for social, for work, so that it has some actual real-world usages. And we wanted to solve the problem of coordinating different AR world spaces, because there's many different ways to tackle this problem, and we wanted to do it in a way that was simple enough that can work across all sorts of different devices, easy for users to grapple and work with. We also set out to create a flexible framework. We like to think of this metaphor of we're building a table that accommodates many different seats, right? The table being our platform, the seats being all the different devices that you can connect to. So your seat may be lower, your seat may have armrests and a cup holder, and we can accommodate all those different features that each seat has on this same table. We also wanted to integrate beyond XR, not just have something that you have an experience and then it's ephemeral and you're out of the experience and it goes away. We wanted to bridge to the real world and connect with external services so that you could actually expand beyond that instance. And we, like I said, we wanted to make spatial computing shine. We wanted to kind of push the boundary as possible, show people in the industry and outside of the industry what can be done with spatial computing and where this could all go. And finally, wanted to build something with love. Since this is a labor of love for all of us. Like it's not our full-time job or anything. We do this on nights and weekends just because we're so passionate about it. That's my daughter Natalia. She's 5.5 years old. She's my older daughter. And through this whole experience of working in XR, I've always tried to involve my kids as much as possible. And with this, we can literally be in the same space together, creating stuff and collaborating. And she wanted me to tell you that that's Gary from SpongeBob SquarePants. Okay, so we told a little bit about who we are, but how did we get to this point? So in 2017, that I was kind of just hacking and exploring, kind of getting my feet wet with mobile VR. This was on Daydream, which is Google's mobile VR platform, and I wanted to see how much I could flex the muscle of that platform. So I set out to make like basically a tilt brush clone as close as I could. And as soon as I got some kind of drawing, I wanted to share it and I wanted to have it multiplayer. And so that's my wife on the other side with another Daydream. So I built this little application called Daybrush. Independently, Steve Lucas was exploring how to make all sorts of different AR, VR platforms work together. He set out to make this framework where you can see there he's using HoloLens and 2 Vive controllers with mixed reality capture live with Android and iOS. So this is all these technologies working together on the same framework, sharing the same reality. And then in 2018, Ali and Steve joined forces to create the first Spatiate Alpha. Now, they started this before Magic Leap, the device, was available. So they started this on mobile, and this drawing here was actually made by Ali on her phone. And then when the Magic Leap 1 came out, because we have this table that can sit any different chairs, Steve was able to very quickly bring Magic Leap to this table and load up the drawing that Ali had made on her phone, but seeing it in augmented reality on a head-mounted display. And then a couple of months later, through continuing these experimentation paths, kind of Steve and I connected and had a first Magic Leap multiplayer experience, and we were so blown away by it that we just realized that we had to do something with it. So we did a couple of prototypes, published a couple of videos. Leap Squad was born out of this, in case you've heard of that. And we set out to kind of push this further and actually formally team up. And that's when we started working on Spatiate in a more serious manner. So I joined the team, and then Casey joined to help with marketing, and then a little bit after that, Coby joined, and then, was it in April, maybe a month or two ago? March? In March, we launched Spatiate on Magic Leap, making it the first multiplayer application on that platform and first cross-platform application that connects with Magic Leap. And so I'll show a little video of what that looks like. So this is our launch trailer, and it's kind of like showing a bunch of different features. It goes very fast, but hopefully in the demo we'll be able to like go through some of the features. We have like a very advanced paint palette that makes good use of the hand tracking and controller to select the strokes and everything. You have multiplayer, remote or local, it has this like open world canvas where you can just collaborate. So why build multi-platform at all, right? There are many reasons why not to do it. So let's start with like the case against multi-platform XR. So first of all, it's high cost, right? So that you have to manage all this additional hardware. You have to manage all these dependencies across all these different platforms. And your project may not even like initially need more than like a mobile app or a Magic Leap app specifically, right? And it's also time consuming to do all this together. So there's many reasons, like for all these reasons, like not everybody's doing this, right? Like otherwise we would all be doing it and we wouldn't even be having this talk. But so why did we do it though? Well, we wanted to make sure that we approach the full reach of AR/VR, from the lowest end of mobile VR and AR to the highest end of head-mounted displays. We wanted to socialize using existing hardware. Whatever application we came out with multi-platform, it was not going to be limited to just high-end expensive devices. It's going to be available to everybody. And if you think about it, from today to when, I don't know how many years into the future, where everybody is going to be having like some smart glasses where the digital world around them is just on their face all the time, there's still time, but also there's billions of phones that are going to support some form of that same experience. So we want to make sure that we tap into that and kind of, as spatial computing becomes more mature and more people become interested in it, they can jump in and share these experiences without having to have access to the highest end of devices. And we also wanted to future-proof against the market, right? So if you bet everything on one platform, if something else takes off, then you have to like port everything over and start from scratch. So this is a great way to just like, if tomorrow Apple comes up with their like eyeglasses or whatever, it's going to take us a couple of days. We plug it in, and then we support that as well. So it's like a very robust way to deal with the future changes and this industry that is still very nascent and like it's changing a lot. And we're not the only ones doing this also. Like the industry is trending towards that, like the HoloLens spectator view, where you can see HoloLens content through an Android device. Alchemy Labs was also experimenting with a mobile spectator for job simulator. Spatial is doing like co-presence meetings across different platforms as well. Immersive, that also supports this kind of content. And the Magicverse, which is Magic Leap's version of device-agnostic shared realities. So how did we approach this? First of all, we started off of the baseline of we have to build a device-agnostic architecture, right? Like we're building a table for different chairs. We're not building the chair. We're building the table. So then, whenever we're thinking about interactions, UX, any kind of logic, it's very, very separated from the hardware that's actually interacting with the user. For example, if you're trying to make an action, you're not saying on this button, press, do this thing. You have a proximity controller or a laser controller, and when the main action is pressed, then do this thing. And then it doesn't matter what kind of controller it is. You just know that it's like a type of controller, then you'll later plug in to the specific hardware. At the same time, we have a very device-specific UX, right? So if you're on a phone, we're going to make use of the touchscreen for menu navigation, for all kinds of interactions. But if you're on a Magic Leap, we're going to make use of hand tracking, eye tracking, gestures, the stick-soft controller, and make sure that we absolutely like make the best use of the particular device. And we also wanted to leverage the game engine. So we built this using Unity, which is a great platform, and it enables us to, they take care of all the compatibilities between the different hardware, and we can focus on actually bringing the best out of every platform. Also, I mentioned this a little bit also, but we had to do an abstract input design, like I mentioned, with not talking directly to the hardware. A way to do this is by leveraging C# delegates, so that you always have a clean division between the different layers of your application. So you can swap out every layer, be it the hardware or be it services on the back end also, and so you're not tied to one particular implementation. Part of that is you're also encapsulating core logic. So the core business logic of your application should not even care about which platform it's at. And then on anchoring, we went with a manual stage anchoring, meaning that we're not trying to recognize a room and say like, oh, okay, you're in this space, so we'll place the anchor here, and then we try to like send that over to the other clients. What we do is very, very simple in a way where the users pick what the anchor is, and then there's different ways to do that. We'll show in a moment, and that way you can very low friction, and it works regardless of which device you're on. So after building this and working on this, we learned a bunch. We learned a bunch from multi-platform development, from spatial computing, from social XR. So the whole point of this talk is to kind of share this with you. So some surprises that we found along the way is that if you have this architecture where you have a common language between these different devices, different platforms, you're pretty much halfway, like most of the way there to get multiplayer, because part of the hard part of multiplayer is building up that common language and that communication between all these different clients. But if you have it between different devices, then you get most of that framework already. So that was surprising how easy it was to get multiplayer once we have multi-platform. And the other very nice surprise was that like we could spin up new platforms really fast. So Steve was able, for example, to port like 5 unique experiences into the Magic Leap as soon as it came out, just because they were already built with this very flexible framework. So just the tippy-top layer that's connecting the abstract controllers to the actual physical hardware, you just plug it up, select which button does what, and like a lot of experiences can be ported over very quickly. And this was like, I think this was the first public mixed reality capture just 11 days after the ML1 launch. And this is with an iPhone to a Magic Leap. Now, along the way, we also hit some like myths or expectations or known truths, but that we found not to be the case. For example, you're only as good as your low end, right? So like you're limited to your lowest common denominator. And like I said before, that's not necessarily true. You could have a flexible platform that you really bring out the best of each individual device. So like I mentioned, right, touchscreen on a mobile device, you make really good use of that. And then on something like HoloLens, you use hand tracking and gestures, and you just plug in the different interactions to how the devices best make use of them. Also, there's this notion that like you should only focus on the highest end because that's where the future is going towards, so it's no point on focusing on the low end of devices or the low end of the experience. But this goes back to what we were saying about before everybody has these high-end devices, there's already a lot of phones out there that can support this. So we'd rather have inclusion and bring those to the table as opposed to just say, well, you'll wait until you can get a device that you can afford. So that's another myth that we kind of dispelled here. Now, on spatial computing specifically, we found, for example, that redundant input is key, especially with something as new as spatial computing, where everything is being defined. Like there's no standards yet. Users don't know how to interact with your app, even if they're experienced in that platform. When someone puts a Magic Leap on, they don't know if they're supposed to point with the controller, use the touchpad, use the hand, use the eyes. Like it's all a learning experience. So if you add multiple layers of redundancy in those interactions, if you make buttons clickable by the raycast or by your finger or by pushing with the controller physically, then no matter what the user expects, it's going to work. And it's really worth spending that extra time to add redundancy, because then when the user tries something and it works, they feel like really excited that the platform works as they expect it to, even though behind the scenes you have like 5 different options that you just happen to hit one. So yeah, make sure you have a lot of options because there's no standards yet. Also, ideas only get you so far. We we spend a lot of time talking about how things should work, about what's the right way to deal with a certain UX problem, and time again, we noticed the best thing to do is to stop talking about it and build it, and just prototype it. And literally, we prototyped and designed a lot of our app, most of the UX that you see now, within the app itself. So we have meetings within Spatiate all the time. Like that's how we build the slides. That's how we plan the demos. We're in there and we're fleshing out, and even just drawing it in space is the first prototype that you can get a good idea of whether something works or not. When I was trying to figure out like how to do a paint palette, I literally painted some strokes around my hand and was like, yeah, that feels about right, and then started working on it. And then you build it, and then you realize that you had some assumptions that were wrong, and then you iterate, and then eventually you get to a nice implementation. Going back to the paint palette, for example, we started like with the idea of let's have a physical rendered paint palette, right? But as soon as you do that, it feels like way too much. There's like a lot of assets there, and it's like too much rendering. So we ended up going with a much more minimalistic approach. So getting good at prototyping stuff and trying them out is very, very valuable. Also, going back to kind of that same example, like the less you show is the more powerful it is. I think I heard Savannah Niles from Magic Leap say this, that for every pixel you draw is a pixel that you remove from the real world. So you don't want to, especially in AR, you don't want to plaster the environment with all sorts of graphics, because the point is to blend with the real world, not to replace it. So the less UI you can do, the more your app is going to be part of the world. Another like huge part of the lesson that we got was that in-device testing is really, really slow. Like you don't want to have to deploy to the device, or even zero iteration, right? Magic Leap supports that, where you can plug in the device and it streams the display over, so you can kind of see it on the device. That's still too slow. Like, it's worth spending the time to create a suite of tools that you can test and do all your interactions within the editor itself. So this, for example, I don't know if you can read that, but that's like an editor locomotion script, for example, and that's a script that lets us move around the scene in the laptop, move the controllers around. We have desktop equivalents for all the interactions, for hand tracking, for hand gestures, for anchoring, like everything you can do it from the editor, and that is really powerful because it lets you, first of all, it lets you try things quickly. For any of you that know Unity, when you have the scene running, you can change things on the fly, so it's very powerful. And also, it gives you a full working client. So that's another platform that we support is desktop, just because that's how we develop. So you'll see in our demo, for example, we had troubles. We had this idea of showing the demo with mobile phones streaming the mobile view, and a phone streaming the Magic Leap, so you could see the Magic Leap view. But because of the Wi-Fi and Chromecast not supporting tethering, like we couldn't set that up. But we have the desktop client, right? So you'll see it through the desktop, and we'll show you this is just one more player in that multiplayer space. So that becomes really powerful and really key to make rapid iteration. So some myths of spatial computing that we saw is that, like, I think we see this less and less, but it used to be more that people really hung up on, like, the illusion must be real. Like, you have to believe it. It has to be realistic graphics. If your brain is not fooled, then it's not worth it. And we saw that it doesn't really matter, right? Like, it's not about how it looks. It's more about how you engage with it. I think Magic Leap does a great job at that. They have for example, one dev sample where they have a little remote control car and it's driving around the scene, and it's very cartoonish looking. It's not like a realistic looking car, but the fact that it's navigating around your mesh and around your environment makes it engaging, and you don't care that it looks like a cartoon. So that can be generalized into, it's like just focus on the interactions, not so much how it looks. Also, that pixel perfect occlusion is required, and that's not true either, right? Like occlusion, light estimation, even like super accurate world locking are all things that improve the experience, but they're not the experience itself. And all these things will just kind of incrementally get better as the technology evolves. So it's not a deal breaker at all to have like subpar performance there. Similarly, it's not all about the specs, right? Like people love to discuss about field of view, about resolution, about pixel stick, but as soon as you put something on, if the experience is engaging, it doesn't matter. Like you don't care about all that as you're using something. Sure, it may show the limitation of the hardware right now, but if the experience is engaging, you just look past it. So for example, this is another of our multiplayer tests where we had avatars with eye tracking, and we have a bunch of different weapons that we're using, and the bow and arrow is a good example of that you don't need one-to-one controller tracking, right? Because for anybody who's used a Magic Leap, you know that the 6-DoF controller lags a little bit, is not exactly precise. And a lot of people kind of like complain about that. But at the same time, when you're doing this and you're like, you use it to place an arrow on a virtual longbow that you have on your fist, it's just so fun and engaging that you don't notice if your arrow is a little bit this way or a little bit that way, right? It's just like, you just go with the experience and it's fun. So now about social XR specifically. This is where from building a prototype, it could be really mature, it could work really nicely. Taking it to production is a long road, especially with anything social. There's policies, there is safety, there's abuse mitigation. We have so many discussions about this. It's like, as soon as you're gonna put people together in your app, there's like this whole extra layer of things you need to worry about. And also, there's a lot of edge cases, like now, right? Like we couldn't get the Chromecast to work with through tethering. So there's all these, like as soon as you get it out into the real world, there's a lot of things that you have to like consider. So even if you think you're done, there's still a lot of ways to go to take it through to production. Also, world coordination, when it's remote multiplayer, it really doesn't matter that much. Like each user sets up the center of the scene wherever they want it. It doesn't really matter how they are in relationship to each other. When they're in the same place, it matters a lot, because then otherwise content is going to be shifted. But it works like manually, even in our first like crudest version where you have to like select a point in the floor and the direction that's like north facing. Like it works. Then you can get more advanced, and for example, right now we do image tracking, which works great, because then we just drop this on the floor, we look at it from the Magic Leap, from your phone, and it just becomes the center of the scene. And also another super interesting lesson that we found is that you have to know when to use a world mesh and when to ignore it. So the environment itself can have collisions and can have occlusion, and you not always want those working all the time. In Spatiate, that is a drawing application, we ignore the mesh for the most part. Like someone could be walking through your wall and you still see them. But then there's other experiences like the multiplayer like battle arena that we had, where it actually becomes part of the experience to have occlusion. Literally the first night that we did multiplayer, we're doing like a time crisis, a time crisis port that Steve built, and so it's just like characters dropped in your environment and you shoot at them, right? And then as soon as you hit them, like they ragdoll, so it looks funny. They fly all around the environment, and that's super fun. At that point, we had occlusion on, so that means that if Steve was behind me, there's a wall behind me, and then he walks further back, he'll disappear behind me, right? So at one point, we're like shooting characters, messing around, and I saw him like kind of out of the corner of my eye walk in this direction. I turn around and he was not longer there. but that's the door to my garage. So I was like, oh, he must have gone to my garage. So I opened the door and I see his avatar. And this is remote multiplayer, by the way, so I just see an avatar for him. I open the door and I see his avatar is back to me, and there's like 6 characters around him. And I was like, oh, backup arrived, kicked the door open and like shut at them, right? And it was like such an organic moment of like adventure in a very silly game. And it all came from just kind of accidentally having occlusion in that particular experience. And the other thing that's interesting is that that was real for me. Steve did not see it that way because there was no wall for him there. But it was like it was real for both of us, but it was unique for me. And then when I explained to him, he understood what happened and like started laughing his ass off as well. So like, there's ways that you can deal with the mesh that can be features, or you can just ignore it. Another good example, I don't know if I covered this later. Oh yeah, here, I'll go here. So some other myths that we found of social XR is that that social AR must be co-located, right? That you have to be in the same space, otherwise it doesn't make sense. We found that that's not the case at all. As you saw from some of the videos, we didn't even meet each other for months, and we were like working, playing, and just there's something very, very unique about social AR, particularly. Like I know probably a lot of us have done social VR, but when it's AR, it's not that you're going into a fictitious place and having an experience and then coming back. With AR, you're bringing those people into your space. So each of us, when we had like multi-people sessions, each of us would feel like we were bringing guests into our house, because you're literally seeing them in your house, and your brain kind of just accepts that, and they're there with you. And it's very, very, the presence of it is very engaging in a way that's hard to describe. Hopefully you get a chance to experience it soon. And the same, right? Like that social AR is just like social VR. It's like, it's very different. There's an intimacy to like seeing the avatars of the people you're engaging with in your space. So much so that Tony Ramirez, who's one of the original Leap Squad gang, he like, you met him in person? Not met him in person. We've never met him in person, but we're like family. Like we're literally like to each other like family, because we've been to each other's houses so much. So it's powerful. And also like social meshes do not necessarily need to match, right? Like we have a layout in this room. If there's someone in a tiny apartment and they're in the same session, like you can still make that work. And actually you can use that to your advantage. To give you an example of that, I'll go back to this video real quick, where there's bullseye targets, and when you destroy them, they break into pieces and they fall to the ground. Now, oh, maybe the other video has more of that. Sorry. This one. Yeah, so those pieces fall to the ground, right? Now, what does the ground mean, and how do you make it work? Well, that's something that we learned through experimentations. That's the kind of thing of like building it is better than just discussing about it. Because as soon as we did it, we realized that the best way to deal with that was placing the bullseye is a networked event. You place it, everybody sees it on the same spot. Breaking it is a networked event, so everybody sees it break. But then it becomes a local event. So we delegate to the local client how to deal with what happens next. So if you break that bullseye here, and we're seeing it here, the pieces fall and hit this ground. But if someone is in a staircase, those same pieces will roll down the stairs. Or if someone has a table, they'll fall on the table. And to each of us, we're seeing a different thing, but it makes sense to each of us, even though it's not the same. So it's an interesting concept that once you see it in action, it makes a lot of sense. And then you realize that you don't need to force all the meshes to like be synchronous to each other. You can just make use of them as you see fit for your cases. So now I'll go back over here. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so then, oh, that brings us to the demo. Sweet. So what we're going to do is we're going to show Spatiate. Oh, there's some people there waiting already. Nice. So this here is, let's see, it seems like we have, by the way, this is what I was talking about. I'm moving through the space with the keyboard. I'm moving that controller with the keyboard, and I can interact with the app entirely, like so. Okay, so we see that there's like my Mac, there's Alex Coulomb and Brandon Powers and another copy of Alex, nice. And they're just here and they're making some art, and we're all collaborating together, right? So see that Brandon's walking around. Looks like Alex has his phone here, and Coby, are you in there? Or you're not in there yet. So, oh, there's Coby. He just jumped in. So generally, you would see, instead of a black backdrop, you would see the world, right? But since this is on the desktop client, you just see a black background. And this also shows you how easily this could be ported into VR, which we have prototypes of that, where it's just, you just add a sky sphere and you have it. So you can, yes, you can jump in with the anchor. I'm gonna show you a little bit of the paint palette here, so you can see how it looks like on Magic Leap. So I'll just place my hand in front of me, and then I'll send palm up, and you see a paint palette there. So here, whoop. Okay, so that's what the paint palette looks like. And that appears, in Magic Leap, that appears when you look at your palm, and we bring that up. Now, like I said, redundancy, right? So as soon as we had that working, I put Natalia in, but of course her little hands are not tracked as well, so she couldn't even like bring it up. So that's when we added redundancy, and now like if you long press on the bumper, then that brings it to the controller and you can place it around. And there's some UI there, right? Like there's these buttons, and those buttons can be pressed with the controller, like physically press them like that, or they can be pressed with, oops, sorry. They can be pressed with a raycast, right? So you can point at it and click, and that you interact with those controllers like that. Or you can use your finger and just like literally press it. So given that all that flexibility means that you can be like painting over here, you have the paint palette, you can lock it, you can switch to something else, you can dismiss it. And then, of course, like selecting colors is just as easy as dipping in the paint that you want, right? So you just go to touch the color, and then you can paint with that color. And of course, on mobile, we have an entirely different version of this, right? On mobile, you have like a palette chooser, and you select the colors, but you can do all the same thing that you can with this. Coby, do you want to show anything with this? I can focus on you.
Oh, yeah. Just it's a very very versatile palette. A lot of different types of objects that you can draw, and it's really cool that people can collaborate. Like I made this AWE, and now someone is adding these flames to it. You could say I could tell people to help me out with this piece of art right here, and they can be doing that on a phone, on other Magic Leaps.
Can you show, if you open the stroke palette and do like just stroke out from each different one?
Yeah.
So you can see how how easy it is to change that.
So this is right there.
Oh, but yeah, like just touch each stroke and pull it out. So you create like the spider of the different strokes. Right.
Can you guys see that?
Yeah, so we can't see his paint palette because that's like a local UI, but he's basically touching each different stroke and then pulling out. So it's just changing strokes is as easy as just like touching it and then you're using that. You can also change the scale of yourself or the scene. That's some of the latest features that we've added. So Coby, you want to like become small and fly around the scene?
Yeah. So this is me shrinking.
Oh, so Coby's tiny. Maybe that's too small. There he is. Where is he? There he is. And then you can fly around. So that also has some interesting questions of how do you deal with that in a local multiplayer, right? Like if I'm standing here, he's standing there, and we're both painting, and then he becomes small or flies up or whatever. What we do right now is when you're in local multiplayer session, you don't see the avatar of the person, so you don't see this ghost on top of them, you just see their brush. But then if they start flying or they change scale, then it's kind of like an astral, like the ghost comes out of it. So then if I was looking at Coby right now and he starts flying off with that control, then I would see his avatar appear and then fly off to where he is. So that's like different ways to deal with it. And my Mac is running out of power. Yeah, so I think this gives you a good idea of how this all works together. We'll be hosting the happy hour tomorrow at the playground. So you'll be able to join that session in person or remotely if you want. You can go right now to spatiate.com/beta and download the mobile betas, and you can give it a try for yourself. And now I want to make sure I leave some room for questions. So we'll just leave it here and open it up to questions.
So you raise your hand with your question, and I'll come run to you. Don't be shy. No silly questions. Yeah. Over here with the iPad.
Oh, hi.
Thanks for this. This is really great. I wanted to ask what's next.
That is a great question because actually we did have another slide, and that is, what's next?
So that was not planted?
So yeah, I don't know who that is. Thank you. So thank you for that question. So we are, of course, prototyping more experiences. We have a bunch of different, some of them you saw, some of them are new. We're both expanding what Spatiate can do and also building more experiences that we want to bring over on top of this same platform, right? So right now, Magic Leap is Spatiate is available on Magic Leap, beta on mobiles coming out. We're going to start bringing it to other platforms as well. If you're interested in particular platforms, feel free to reach out to us. But then on top of that, we're also going to be starting to publish more like completely different applications like that battle arena, the target practice, the bow and arrow. We're going to be building some more of that on top of this same core infrastructure to show that this is not just one app, right? This is like the infrastructure underneath it that supports all this because of the work that we spent building that underlying framework. So that's coming up. Also, like I said, mobile, the beta is available right now. We'll have that launch officially soon. We have the happy hour tomorrow, so you can definitely stop by, and we're gonna try to build like a collaborative art piece for AWE that you can all jump in and contribute. So that should be fun. And that's what's next. Did that answer your question? Awesome. Yes, that's.